The golden era of the WWF didn't just create immortal legends. It also gave birth to some gimmicks so bizarre you can't help but ask, how did this ever make it onto TV? Beyond icons like Hogan, Warrior, or Macho Man, there was a lineup of truly odd characters: a cat-themed warrior, a crocodile hunter, a neon space fighter, and even a sneaky debt collector who moved like a thief in the night. They showed up briefly and then vanished, leaving their mark only in the memories of hardcore fans. Today, we're digging back into those forgotten names. Kung Bat Dao Nai Thoi Now, Wrestling Sphere, Go. 1. Saba Simba. In the loud, over-the-top golden era of early 90s WWF, when everything on TV had to look as cartoony and colorful as possible, Tony Atlas returned to the company under a new name, Saba Simba. From a bodybuilding icon and former tag team champion, Atlas was suddenly turned into an African tribal warrior that looked like he'd stepped straight out of the creative team's simplified imagination. He wore a feathered headdress, loincloth, big necklaces, carried a spear, and walked to the ring dancing and bouncing around like he was in some exaggerated, primitive ritual. On TV, WWF kept hammering home the idea that Tony Atlas had reconnected with his roots, that Saba Simba was a man of color proudly embracing his heritage. On paper, that sounds noble and meaningful, but the execution went in a completely different direction. Instead of a respectful tribute, the character came off like a stereotypical Hollywood-era caricature of Africans. Wild, primitive, just dancing and shouting on the ring apron. Inside the ring, Saba Simba had no real story, no layered personality beyond simply being the tribal warrior. He showed up here and there, picked up a few throwaway wins, then vanished from TV like he'd never been there. No big feud, no breakout moment, no match fans could look back on as a classic. For someone who used to be Tony Atlas, a symbol of strength and a respected name of the previous generation, being shoved into this role felt like a bitter step backward. Viewed from today's lens, Saba Simba is often brought up as a textbook example of racially loaded gimmicks from that era. On paper, you could try to defend it as celebrating culture, but the way it was presented turned it into a cheap costume act that made it hard for black viewers to feel truly respected. Not long after, the Saba Simba name was quietly retired, and Tony Atlas slowly faded away from the spotlight. What remains is the memory of a strange, short-lived gimmick that regularly lands on lists of the worst ideas of WWF's so-called Golden Age. 2. Battlecat. In a period when WWF was overflowing with comic book characters, from cowboys and cops to, yes, even a garbage man, the arrival of a cat warrior was enough to make fans raise an eyebrow. That was Battlecat, the persona Brady Boone took on in 1990. Instead of walking out as a regular wrestler, he covered his face with a black cat mask with pointy ears and wore a bright, superhero-style outfit that looked like a low-budget cartoon character who'd wandered onto a wrestling show by mistake. The gimmick was introduced completely straight. Battlecat was a cat-like warrior with outstanding acrobatics, as flexible as a feline, moving smoothly, slipping out of trouble, then suddenly launching into rope-springing attacks, flips, and lightning-fast dropkicks. On paper, it was basically an American-style luchador mixed with an animal character to appeal to kids and stand out on the card. In reality, it felt more like you were watching a cosplayer tossed onto national television. Every time Battlecat appeared, the commentators tried their best to hype him up as a mysterious, agile fighter with wild cat instincts in the ring. But outside of a few flashy high spots, the persona had almost no story and no real reason to exist beyond looking different. There were no promos that really stuck, no long-term rivalry, just a string of short matches where he beat enhancement guys quickly and that was it. The core problem was that nobody really knew what to do with Battlecat. He was too childish for adults to take seriously, but not cute or iconic enough for kids to obsess over. At a time when WWF was already crowded with colorful, cartoonish acts, a guy dressed up as a cat simply didn't have enough weight to survive. After a little over a month of sporadic TV appearances, Battlecat quietly disappeared from the screen. No farewell, no angle to wrap things up. The gimmick faded so fast that nowadays, if you bring it up, only the hardcore fans who love digging through old tapes will nod and say, "Oh yeah, that weird cat warrior guy. I still remember him." 3. The Goon. In the era when WWF was obsessed with characters that looked like they'd stepped straight out of a Saturday morning cartoon, the Goon is one of the clearest examples of the mindset: any sport can be turned into a wrestling gimmick. Instead of being just another wrestler, this guy was presented as a hockey enforcer, An ultra-violent ice hockey player who'd been kicked out of every league for breaking rules, cheap-shotting opponents, and causing non-stop chaos. When there was no rink left for him, he switched careers and became a pro wrestler. You can already tell where this is going. The Goon's gear was a bizarre mix of hockey player and wrestler. Bulky shoulder pads, baggy shorts, wrestling boots with soles shaped like ice skates, and a helmet he rarely took off. Every time he made his entrance, instead of walking normally, he exaggeratedly slid and shuffled down the aisle like he was still on an invisible sheet of ice, then awkwardly climbed into the ring. Just from that entrance, fans understood this was a character built first and foremost for laughs. In the ring, the Goon fought exactly like a rink thug. He'd smash his whole body into opponents like a hockey body check, ram them into the corner, pin them against the ropes, then pound away. Half the time, it felt more like you were watching a brawl from a hockey highlight reel than an actual wrestling match. The pacing wasn't awful, but everything revolved around one single idea. This guy fights like he's still on the ice, and that's it. The problem was that once you got past the initial novelty, there was nothing deeper underneath. No long-term storyline, no strong personal rivalry, no standout promo that made his name stick. At a time when WWF was already full of day-job characters walking straight from the real world into the ring, cops, doctors, lawyers and more, adding a fired hockey goon on top of that didn't bring anything truly new. In the end, the Goon had a brief run, worked a few matches to add some variety to the show, then quickly vanished from TV. Today, whenever people list the odd cartoonish gimmicks of WWF's Golden Era, the Goon is usually brought up as a prime example. Fun idea on the surface, good for a few weeks of TV, but nowhere near strong enough to build an entire career around. 4. Damien Demento. In the loud, colorful Golden Era of WWF, where almost any crazy idea had a shot at making it onto TV, Damien Demento was one of those names that made fans both curious and unsure how to react. Instead of coming off like a serious powerhouse trying to climb to the top of the card, he looked like he'd just escaped from some distant planet, dragging a head full of odd obsessions with him. Demento's look was outer space in the strangest way possible. His hair was styled up and wild like a dated art project, one shoulder draped with a giant skull that made him look like he'd walked straight out of a B-movie horror flick. His eyes bulged, his face constantly twisted as if he was hearing something normal people couldn't. From the moment he stepped onto the aisle, you knew this wasn't a character designed for fans to relate to. He was there to make you feel uneasy. His biggest hook was in his promos. Demento rarely spoke to the audience in a normal, direct way. Instead, he turned toward empty space, whispering, screaming, and answering the voices in his head like he was taking orders from some mysterious force. Every line was rambling and off-kilter, hammering home that he was disturbed, his mind not exactly existing in the same world as the rest of the roster. The idea was clear, a lunatic haunted by cosmic voices, coming to WWF to carry out orders no one else could understand. Ironically, the brightest moment of Demento's short career came very early. He was chosen to work the main event of the very first episode of Raw against The Undertaker. On paper, that sounds huge, but in reality he was basically there to be a sacrifice for the dead man. From that point on, Damien Demento slid down the card, showing up mainly as a body for others to beat, then quietly leaving the company. Today, most casual fans barely remember his name. Damien Demento mainly lives on in the memories of people who love digging through history, a deranged, outer space gimmick with one brief flash of spotlight on the very first Raw, and then swallowed by time without mercy. 5. Skinner. In the middle of all the flashy characters of WWF's Golden Age, Skinner showed up looking like he'd just crawled straight out of the Florida Everglades swamp and onto the wrestling ring. No glitz, no sparkle. He was the kind of guy you could almost smell just by looking at him. Mud, swamp water, and trouble. With wild hair and beard, a permanent scowl, and gear that looked like a crocodile had already taken a few bites out of it, he felt more like a backwoods hunter than a TV star. Skinner's trademark was whatever he was always chewing on. He'd chomp away non-stop, then when he felt like it, he'd spit the mess right into his opponent's face. That nasty visual, paired with his grimy expression, sold the idea perfectly. This was that guy from the deepest swamp who accidentally wandered into civilization. On top of that, he carried a crocodile claw as a prop, waving it around, pointing it at opponents' faces like a warning, "You're about to get skinned." In the ring, Skinner wasn't a high flyer or a polished technician. His style was rough, dirty, and mean, exactly what you'd expect from a wild game hunter bringing his take-him-down-fast mindset into wrestling. He'd yank hair, rake eyes, trap opponents in the corner, and lay in shots like he was settling a personal score. None of his moves were pretty, but they fit the image perfectly. A man who lives in the wild, relying on brute instinct and cruelty to survive. Even though Skinner rarely sniffed major titles, his role on the card was extremely important. He was the swamp checkpoint for babyfaces on the rise. Bret Hart, Owen Hart, and plenty of other fan favorites had to wade through the marsh, beating this crocodile hunter to prove they were tough enough. Beating Skinner wasn't just another win. It was a statement that they could handle the nastiest, grimiest heels WWF threw in their way. So while he's not a name most casual fans talk about today, Skinner remains one of the strangest yet most visually satisfying gimmicks of that era. Filthy, wild, unpleasant, and because of that, surprisingly hard to forget. 6. Repo Man. After stepping away from the painted-up, armored chaos of demolition, Barry Darsow wasn't rebuilt as another unstoppable monster. Instead, he got tossed straight into the Oddball pile as Repo Man. Rather than playing a muscle-bound destroyer, he became a shady repossession guy. The kind of man hired to take back cars, houses, and belongings from people who missed their payments. It sounds serious on paper, but WWF turned it into something straight out of a cartoon. The more you watched, the more he looked like a comic book thief come to life. Repo Man always showed up in a dark trench coat with a mask that covered most of his face and a length of chain slung over his shoulder as an intimidation prop. He didn't just walk, he crept. He hunched over, sneaking and skulking, constantly looking around like he was afraid of getting caught. Sometimes he'd break into this creepy little giggle, like, "I just stole something you don't know about yet." From his eyes to the way he moved his hands, everything was exaggerated to tell you, this guy lives in the shadows, waiting to strip you of your stuff. The introductory vignettes pushed the weirdness even further. Fans saw Repo Man sneaking through parking lots, weaving between rows of cars before pulling out his tools and repossessing some poor victim's ride. In other clips, he'd slink up to someone's house, lurking like a burglar, sending the clear message, if you skip your payments, he's coming, and he doesn't need to knock. The message was simple enough, but the delivery was so over the top that it was hard to treat him as a truly dangerous threat. In the ring, Repo Man was mostly a mid-card heel, there to be a stepping stone for babyfaces on their way up. He cheated constantly, pulling trunks, grabbing hair, using his chain to intimidate, hiding underhanded tactics from the referee. Every little trick in the book to make the crowd hate him. But most of the time, he still ended up getting cleaned out by the good guys so they'd look stronger. Even though he never got near the main event scene, Repo Man is still one of the most memorable faces from WWF's Golden Era. A repo agent turned cartoon villain, always lurking, snickering, and melting back into the darkness. Just weird enough that whenever his name comes up, fans can't help but laugh. 7. Abe Knuckleball Schwarz. If we're talking about gimmicks that make you rub your eyes and wonder if you're even watching the right show, Abe Knuckleball Schwarz absolutely deserves a spot. Instead of being a regular wrestler, this guy was presented as a rebellious baseball player who was fed up with the entire world. His face was painted white with black lines running across it, like a walking, talking baseball. One quick glance and you'd swear he was the result of a brainstorming session that went way off the rails during the WWF's Golden Era. Abe always carried a baseball bat, but not in a heroic sportsman way, more like someone ready to start trouble at any moment. His attitude was constantly angry and annoyed, stomping around like he'd just had his salary slashed by the league office. The whole character revolved around the idea that he represented the rage of players facing strikes, low pay, and unfair treatment. In classic cartoon WWF fashion, they took a serious real-life topic and twisted it into a half-comedic, half-satirical caricature. Abe Knuckleball Schwarz's most memorable moments didn't really happen in the ring, but when he wandered around the arena holding a sign that read, "I'm on strike." That slogan was pure American wordplay. It referenced both a labor strike and a strike in baseball. He was like a walking billboard, yelling at the world that he was being mistreated, but the way he did it was so over the top that fans couldn't decide whether to sympathize with him or just laugh. In the ring, Abe was mostly there to fill TV time. He never got a real push, never had any long-term feuds, and didn't leave behind any classic matches. The whole thing basically existed just to remind viewers, oh right, WWF came up with another bizarre character. Yet because of how weird he looked and that baseball-painted face, Abe Knuckleball Schwarz still ended up being one of the most unforgettable gimmicks of that era. Not for what he accomplished, but because every time you look back, you can't help but ask, how did this ever make it on TV? 8. Max Moon. If you need a perfect example of whatever the WWF thought of in the Golden Era, they just put straight on TV, then Max Moon is your guy. Instead of a standard wrestler in tights and boots, he showed up looking like a time-displaced warrior from the future, half astronaut, half character ripped straight from a cyberpunk arcade game. His whole body was covered in a neon blue and pink suit with geometric patterns and cables running everywhere, and the moment you saw it, you could tell it wasn't cheap. The original idea came from Connan, and later the role was handed over to Paul Diamond. Max Moon was presented as a fighter from a distant future, bringing advanced technology down to the ring. His shoulders were fitted with firework launchers, so every entrance meant bursts of pyro, sparks flying everywhere, as if he had a full weapon system built into his gear. At one point, the character even had a jetpack of fireworks on his back, firing off effects as he walked to the ring. It looked incredibly flashy, and incredibly inconvenient. The problem was that what looked impressive on a poster was a nightmare in reality. The bulky, over-designed costume made it hard to move. A wrestler is supposed to be agile, hitting the ropes, jumping, constantly shifting around. But here he was, trapped inside a neon suit of armor that felt more like a convention cosplay than ring gear. Every time he stepped onto the ropes or went for a move, it felt like he was just trying not to get tangled up in his own outfit. On paper, Max Moon was designed to catch kids' attention and make it feel like the future has arrived in the WWF. In practice, fans didn't really connect with him. The character was too abstract, had no clear storyline, no standout rivalry, and no promo that truly explained who he was beyond, he's from the future. It all stopped at being eye candy for a few seconds during the entrance, then slipped out of people's minds once the match actually started. After a short run from late 1992 to 1993, the Max Moon gimmick quietly disappeared. High costs, awkward to wrestle in, no real crowd reaction. All of that turned the character into one of the strangest experiments of the WWF's golden age. It looked fancy, but never found a lasting place in fans' hearts. Nowadays, Max Moon mostly lives in that corner of history only hardcore fans digging through old footage still remember. 9. The Berserker. In the middle of the early 90s sea of colorful characters, the Berserker looked like he'd just stepped out of a Norse history book and then been cranked up to full cartoon mode. Thick fur cloak, tall boots, sword in hand, giant horned helmet, and a face that always looked like he was mid-meltdown. He didn't walk to the ring like a normal person. He staggered and jerked around, shouting, "Huss! Huss!" non-stop, like a Viking warrior who had been dropped into the modern wrestling world by mistake. Just his entrance alone was enough to make the crowd either fired up or cracking up. What set the Berserker apart was how he never once seemed like a calm, controlled wrestler. Every movement was rough and wild, as if the only thought in his head was to smash whatever stood in front of him. The oversized sword he carried wasn't just a prop to pose with, it was used like a murder weapon in storyline. There were moments where he actually tried to stab his opponents with it, creating action movie-style tension. Everyone knew it was all for show, but it still looked unnerving. One of the Berserker's most famous spots was how he tried to win by countout in the most literal way possible. Instead of pinning his opponent, he'd toss them to the outside, then charge and throw himself out of the ring as well, like a lunatic who didn't fully understand the rules. That made the character both dangerous and ridiculous at the same time. The very definition of an unhinged warrior who couldn't tell what his real goal was, only that he needed to keep charging ahead. Those self-sacrifice spots gave his matches a constant sense of chaos and unpredictability. Even though the Berserker appeared fairly often in the early 90s, he rarely got close to any titles or the main event scene. He was usually used as a weird checkpoint for babyfaces. If you could survive this Berserk Viking, you'd proven you were tough. No need for championships or big winning streaks. The Berserker still made his mark thanks to his wild look, that haunting "Huss" chant, and all those moments that were equal parts funny and unsettling. He remains one of the strangest creations of the WWF's golden age. 10. Man Mountain Rock. If you had to pick one guy who looked like he'd walked out of the backstage area of a rock concert and accidentally wandered onto a wrestling show, it would be Man Mountain Rock. Picture a massive dude with long hair draped over his shoulders, a big gut, leather jacket, and a guitar almost half his size. He looked more like a road-weary touring musician than a polished pro wrestler. From the moment the first riff hit, it was obvious WWF wanted fans to buy into the image of a rebellious rock star. The kind of guy who could smash an amp on stage and then stomp down to the ring ready to throw hands with anyone in his way. The only truly standout part of Man Mountain Rock was his entrance. Every time he appeared, he carried a custom guitar with the WWF logo, stopped at the top of the ramp, and jammed a few improvised riffs before casually heading to the ring. Visually, it worked. Colorful lights, screaming guitar, and a huge guy swaying to the beat, looking every bit like an out-of-control rocker. The problem was, all that intrigue pretty much ended at the entrance. Once the music stopped and the bell rang, Man Mountain Rock turned into a very average mid-carder, not terrible in the ring, but with nothing explosive enough to really stick in people's minds. That era of WWF was packed with gimmick jobs who could fight, garbage men, butchers, boxers, and Man Mountain Rock was simply the rock musician who wrestles version of that formula. He never got plugged into any major storyline, had no memorable rivalries, and didn't win any important titles. It was an expensive gimmick with a custom guitar and flashy entrance, but no real story, no layered character, and no serious creative push behind it. In the end, the name Man Mountain Rock flashed briefly on TV and then quietly vanished, leaving later fans with a textbook example of the WWF Golden Age. The look and concept were on fire, but when the substance wasn't there, the act was always doomed to fade out. Those were some of the strangest, short-lived yet unforgettable gimmicks from WWF's Golden Era. If you remember any even weirder names, drop a comment below, hit like, subscribe to Wrestling Sphere, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upcoming videos.